Stay right there. Do not move.
I didn't do anything, sir. Why are you stopping me?
Sir, you're not going anywhere until I see that receipt. Stop. Right there. The words weren't a request. They were a command, sharp, clipped, and loud enough to cut through the soft hum of checkout scanners and the artificial music floating above Tech Haven's polished tile floor. It was the kind of tone meant to shock a teenager stealing a candy bar. Not the kind you used on a 54-year-old man in a bespoke charcoal suit. Marcus Thorne didn't slow his pace. He adjusted the grip on the reinforced shopping bag in his left hand heavy. Structured. Professional. Inside were a secure laptop and a high-performance encrypted drive array. Not luxury items. Tools. The kind of tools used to trace shell companies, money trails, and financial crimes that destroyed lives quietly and efficiently. The automatic glass doors were only 10 steps away. Outside, the California sun was already baking the asphalt, visible through the glass like a punishment waiting for anyone forced to stand still too long. Sir, I am talking to you. Still. Marcus didn't turn around. That was when a man in a bright yellow polo shirt stepped directly into his path. The shirt strained at the seams. The name tag read Gary. Gary raised his hand. Palm out. Fingers twitching with impatience. Receipt. Now. Store policy. Marcus stopped. Not because Gary had authority, but because Marcus had discipline. He stood 6'2". Posture, straight. Calm behind thin rectangular glasses. The kind of calm forged by decades of federal service by staring across interrogation tables at men who laundered millions and killed without blinking. Gary. Marcus said evenly, reading the name tag. I have purchased these items. They are now my property. Gary opened his mouth. But Marcus continued, I am leaving the store. I do not consent to a search of my personal belongings. And I am not required to show you a receipt. Please step aside. For a moment, Gary just stared. This wasn't how it usually went. People complied. People argued. People got nervous. But this man didn't raise his voice, didn't apologize, didn't explain himself. He simply stated facts. You can't leave. Gary blurted out, blinking rapidly. It's policy. We check all receipts. Look at the sign. Marcus nodded once. Policy is not law. He replied calmly. And unless you have probable cause to believe I committed a crime which you do not, you are dangerously close to false imprisonment. He stepped smoothly to the side. I paid at Register 4. Cashier named Sarah. 3 minutes ago. Marcus met Gary's eyes. Steady and unthreatening. Have a good afternoon. And he started walking toward the exit. Gary felt control slipping through his fingers and panic rushed in to replace it. He looked past Marcus's shoulder. And then he shouted the one word that changed everything. Officer, officer, he's refusing to stop. He's trying to leave with merchandise. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. He felt it immediately. That subtle shift in the air, the moment a minor inconvenience turns into something dangerous. Footsteps echoed from the vestibule. A uniform was approaching. And Marcus Thorne knew this was no longer about a receipt. Marcus turned slowly. Walking toward them from the vestibule was a uniformed police officer. Mid to late 20s. Posture stiff. Stride deliberate. His uniform was freshly pressed. Boots polished. Duty belt heavy, with equipment he touched more often than he reflected on. The nameplate on his chest read Braden. His eyes weren't scanning the situation. They were locked onto Marcus. Is there a problem here? Braden asked. But he didn't wait for an answer. He took in the tailored suit, the expensive watch, the large, reinforced bag. And in that brief silence, Marcus saw it happen, the mental shortcuts snapping into place. A story forming where facts should have been. He won't show a receipt. "Officer," Gary said quickly, his confidence returning now that backup had arrived. He's trying to walk out with a bag full of electronics. Braden stepped forward, closing the distance until he was well inside Marcus's personal space. Close enough to be intentional. Close enough to be threatening. "Drop the bag." "Sir," Braden said, "and let's see that receipt." It wasn't a request. It was a test. Marcus didn't flinch. "Officer," he said calmly, "I am not required to show a receipt to leave a store. I have committed no crime." Braden's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for a lecture," he replied. "I asked for a receipt." "I understand," Marcus said, "and I am declining." That was the moment the tone shifted. "You're refusing a lawful order," Braden said, his voice lowering, trying to sound heavier, more dangerous than it was. "No," Marcus corrected gently. "I'm exercising a lawful right." Gary shifted uncomfortably. This had already gone further than he expected. "Store policy," Gary started again. "Policy is not law." Marcus replied without looking at him. His eyes stayed on Braden. "And unless you have reasonable suspicion that I've committed theft, this conversation is over." Braden let out a short, humorless laugh. "Reasonable suspicion," he repeated. "You think you're free to argue law with me in my own jurisdiction. I think the Constitution applies everywhere." Marcus answered. That sentence landed hard. Shoppers slowed. A woman near the door stopped pushing her stroller. 2 teenagers near a phone kiosk raised their cameras. Braden noticed, and he didn't like it. "Sir," Braden said sharply, stepping even closer, "you're not leaving until we figure this out." Marcus looked down briefly at the officer's boots, then back up to his eyes. "Officer Braden," he said, intentionally reading the name plate. "Am I being detained?" Braden hesitated, just for half a second. That pause, that uncertainty, told Marcus everything he needed to know. "We'll see," Braden replied. And in that moment, what started as a receipt check became something far more dangerous, a power struggle. "We'll see," Braden repeated. The words hung in the air, deliberately vague. Not a detention. Not freedom. A gray zone where authority could stretch without being questioned. Marcus didn't raise his voice. "Officer," he said evenly, "if I am being detained, you are required to tell me why." Braden exhaled sharply through his nose. "You're being stopped because you're acting suspicious," he said, refusing a receipt, trying to leave. "That's enough." "That is not reasonable suspicion," Marcus replied. "That is non-compliance with a store policy." Braden's posture changed. His shoulders squared. His chest pushed forward. "Sir, you need to lower your voice and listen to instructions." Marcus blinked once. "My voice is level," he said calmly. "I haven't raised it. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights." The mention of an amendment hit Braden like an insult. "You don't get to dictate the law to me," Braden snapped. "You don't get to decide when you're free to go." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's correct," he said. "The law does." Braden took a step closer, too close. Well, inside the reactionary gap taught at every academy. A calculated intimidation tactic Marcus had seen hundreds of times. "You're not free to go until I say you are," Braden said. His right hand slid from his belt buckle and rested on the grip of his taser. The yellow plastic stood out under the fluorescent lights like a warning sign. Phones rose higher. A murmur rippled through the entrance. Officer, Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly, not louder, but firmer, sharper. Let me be very clear so there's no misunderstanding. Braden didn't respond. For a detention to be lawful, Marcus continued, you must have reasonable suspicion based on specific, articulable facts that a crime has occurred or is occurring. Braden's jaw clenched. A refusal to show a receipt, Marcus said, does not meet that standard. There is clear case law on this. Terry v. Ohio, Florida, VV, J. L. Braden's face reddened. I don't need a Supreme Court lesson from a shoplifter. He sneered. Gary shifted beside them. He won't just show it. Gary said weakly. If he has nothing to hide. Did you see me steal anything? Marcus asked, finally turning to him. Gary hesitated. No, but. Did you see me bypass a register? Marcus pressed. Well, no. Then there is no crime, Marcus said calmly, turning back to Braden. Only inconvenience. Braden felt the crowd closing in, not physically, but psychologically, eyes watching, cameras recording. He needed to regain control. Give me your ID, Braden ordered. Now. Am I under arrest? Marcus asked. No. Then, I am not required to provide identification, Marcus replied. And I am leaving. Marcus turned slowly, deliberately, to walk toward the exit, a controlled movement meant to show he wasn't fleeing, only ending the encounter. Braden reacted on instinct and anger. He grabbed Marcus's arm. Don't you walk away from me, Braden shouted. The entrance went silent. Marcus froze. He looked down at the hand gripping his sleeve, then up into Braden's eyes. Officer, Marcus said quietly, remove your hand. Braden tightened his grip. You are now committing battery. The words landed like a gavel strike, and in that moment, the line was crossed. For a brief moment, no one moved. Braden's hand was still gripping Marcus's arm. Marcus stood perfectly still. Phones were everywhere now. Little black rectangles raised chest-high, silently documenting what authority looked like when it felt challenged. Battery, Braden scoffed, forcing out a short laugh. I'm conducting an investigation. You are physically restraining me without lawful cause. Marcus replied calmly. That is a seizure, and it is unlawful. Stop resisting, Braden barked loudly, the word echoing through the entrance. Marcus didn't move. I am not resisting, he said. I am standing still. You grabbed me. The accusation was strategic, a familiar tactic. Label the calm subject as aggressive so your own escalation feels justified. Braden released Marcus's arm abruptly but stepped even closer, chest nearly touching him now. You want to play lawyer? Braden said through clenched teeth. Fine. Drop the bag. Hands behind your back. Marcus didn't comply. Am I being arrested? He asked. I'm detaining you for investigation of theft. Braden snapped. Based on what evidence? Marcus asked. A refusal to comply with a store policy is not a crime. I have a witness, Braden said, pointing sharply at Gary. Marcus turned his head slightly. You have a store employee who is frustrated that I didn't obey him, Marcus said. That is not evidence. That is irritation. Braden's face flushed. He could feel the situation slipping away, not because he was wrong, but because people were watching. Order depended on obedience, and obedience was being denied. Look at me, Marcus said quietly, locking eyes with him. Look at my demeanor. Look at this situation. You are making a mistake that will cost you more than this afternoon. Braden's eyes narrowed. You threatening me. I'm offering you an exit. Marcus replied, "Let me leave. We both go home." Braden's hand slid back to his taser. The retention hood snapped open with a sharp click that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Gasps followed. "This is your last warning," Braden said, voice tight. "Get on the ground or you're getting tased." "He didn't do anything," a woman shouted from behind. "I said back up," Braden screamed, waving his free hand toward the onlookers. "This is a police operation." Marcus didn't move. He stood there, shoulders squared, expression no longer calm but disappointed. "Officer," Marcus said evenly, "I am non-violent. I am not threatening you. I am passively refusing an unlawful order." Braden hesitated. The taser felt heavier in his hand now. Tasing a man in a suit, surrounded by witnesses, suddenly didn't feel like a win. With a sharp motion, Braden holstered the taser, but he didn't de-escalate. Instead, he reached for his handcuffs. "Fine," he growled. "We'll do this the hard way." And in that instant, authority gave up any pretense of restraint. Braden lunged forward. In one sharp motion, he grabbed Marcus's wrist and twisted it behind his back hard. Fast and completely unnecessary. The move wasn't tactical. It was emotional. "Ow," Marcus said. Not a scream. Not a plea. Just a flat statement of fact. "You're hurting me. I am not resisting." "Stop fighting," Braden shouted for the cameras. Not for Marcus. Marcus stood perfectly still, his body rigid only from the pain in his shoulder as the joint was torqued beyond comfort. "I am not resisting," Marcus repeated, his voice tight but controlled. The reinforced shopping bag slipped from his left hand and hit the floor with a heavy thud, electronics clattering inside. "That bag contains sensitive equipment," Marcus said. "If it's damaged, you will be liable." "Shut up," Braden snapped. He shoved Marcus forward, slamming him chest first into the glass wall of the vestibule. The impact rattled the automatic doors, drawing gasps from the crowd outside. Phones surged closer. Braden yanked Marcus's other arm back and snapped the handcuffs shut tight. Too tight. The cold steel bit into his wrists as Braden ratcheted them down another click for emphasis. "You're under arrest," Braden panted, leaning in close. "Disorderly conduct, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "You cannot have resisting arrest," he said quietly, "without a lawful underlying arrest." Braden ignored him. He spun Marcus around roughly and shoved him toward the exit. "Walk." Outside, a crowd had formed a loose semicircle of shocked faces, raised phones, and angry voices. "Why are you arresting him?" A man in a construction vest yelled. "He paid. I saw him in line." "Back up," Braden screamed, his face slick with sweat. "Everyone back the hell up." Marcus walked with measured steps, hands cuffed behind him, head held high. He didn't stumble. He didn't plead. He turned his head slightly toward the cameras. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said clearly. "I am being arrested for refusing to show a receipt. I have committed no crime." "Shut your mouth." Braden snapped. He opened the back door of the patrol car and shoved Marcus inside without checking his head. Marcus had to duck quickly to avoid slamming his skull against the door frame. The door slammed shut. The noise of the crowd was cut off instantly, replaced by the hollow silence of the cruiser's back seat. Braden stood there for a moment, breathing hard, hands on his hips. In his mind, this was over. He had taken control. He walked around to the driver's side, climbed in, and started the engine. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, siren chirping once to clear pedestrians. In the back seat, Marcus shifted carefully, the cuffs already cutting into his circulation. He stared straight ahead. The encounter was over. Now, the evidence phase had begun. The back seat of the patrol car was hard plastic molded, unforgiving, designed for compliance, not comfort. Marcus shifted his weight slightly. The handcuffs were tight, too tight. With every small movement, he could feel the steel biting deeper into his wrists, cutting off circulation. Braden hadn't double-locked them. A rookie mistake, or a deliberate one. The cruiser pulled away from the curb. Braden didn't look back at first. He sat tall behind the wheel, adrenaline still buzzing through his veins, hands gripping the steering wheel like trophies. In his mind, the encounter had ended exactly the way it was supposed to. Control restored. Authority asserted. "You see," Braden said finally, glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "This didn't have to happen." Marcus said nothing. "If you'd just shown the receipt," Braden continued, shaking his head, "you'd be home right now. Instead, you want to play games." Silence. Braden smirked. "Now you're going to spend the night in holding. Maybe see a judge Monday. Hope you didn't have plans." Marcus stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, not from fear, but from calculation. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing you could do in the back of a police car wasn't to argue. It was to talk. Braden tried again. "What do you do anyway?" he asked. "You dress like a lawyer. That why you think you know the law?" No response. Braden scoffed. "Figures." The radio crackled softly with dispatch chatter as the cruiser merged onto the main road. Streetlights slid across the interior in rhythmic flashes, briefly illuminating Marcus's calm expression, then plunging it back into shadow. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Marcus controlled his breathing, a technique drilled into him years ago during Joint Task Force operations, when calm was the only thing separating survival from catastrophe. He wasn't in a police car, he told himself. He was in a workspace. Violation, one failure to double-lock handcuffs. Policy violation. Potential nerve damage. Violation, two failure to secure prisoner with a seatbelt. Negligence. Braden took a corner too sharply. Marcus slid across the plastic bench, shoulder slamming into the side panel. Violation 3. "You don't like that." "Huh," Braden muttered, half to himself. "Maybe next time you'll learn some respect." Marcus said nothing. Braden needed a reaction. He needed to feel justified. "You know," Braden added, "guys like you always think you're special." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he still didn't speak, because silence, right now, wasn't weakness. It was documentation. The cruiser sped toward the precinct, blue lights reflecting faintly off storefront windows. Braden thought he was driving a prisoner. He had no idea he was transporting a witness, and the most damning piece of evidence was sitting right behind him watching, listening, remembering every second. The patrol car rolled into the precinct sally port. The heavy metal gate rattled shut behind it, sealing off the outside world. Fluorescent lights flooded the concrete bay with a harsh, unforgiving glare. This was where people usually arrived smaller than when they'd left the street. Braden cut the engine. "All right," he said, climbing out. End of the line. He opened the back door and grabbed Marcus by the arm, pulling him out with a little more force than necessary. Marcus stepped down carefully, shoulders stiff, wrists aching. "Watch your head," Braden said flatly, not actually watching. They walked into the booking area. The smell hit immediately, stale coffee, floor cleaner, sweat, and resignation. A drunk man was singing off-key from a holding cell. Two officers typed reports without looking up. Behind the high counter sat Sergeant Miller, mid-50s. Gray creeping into his hair. Eyes tired in a way that only decades on the job could produce. Miller glanced up. "What do we have?" "Kyle." Braden straightened. Chest out. "Refusal to comply," he said. "Disorderly conduct. Obstruction. Guy wouldn't show a receipt at Tech Haven. Caused a scene. Resisted arrest." Miller frowned slightly. "Over a receipt?" he asked. He was acting suspicious. Braden replied quickly. "Refused ID. Thought he knew the law." Miller's eyes shifted to Marcus. The suit, the posture, the calm. This didn't look like the usual intake. "Name?" Miller asked. Marcus didn't answer. "He's playing the silent game." Braden scoffed. Miller nodded once. "All right," he said evenly. "Empty your pockets. Everything on the counter." Braden unlocked one cuff. Marcus moved slowly, deliberately. A pen, a phone, keys. Then he reached into his back pocket and removed a slim leather wallet. He placed it on the counter. Miller picked it up, intending to pull a driver's license. He opened it and stopped. The movement of his hands froze mid-motion. The room seemed to go quiet not because the noise stopped, but because attention snapped inward. Miller stared down at what lay inside. On one side, a federal credential, holographic seal catching the light. On the other, a heavy gold badge. United States Department of the Treasury. Criminal Investigation. Special Agent. Miller blinked once, then looked up at Marcus, then back down at the badge. He closed the wallet slowly as if it might explode. "Kyle," Miller said quietly. "Yeah." Sarge Braden replied, already turning back to his paperwork. "Did you check his ID before you brought him in?" Braden hesitated. "He wouldn't give it to me," he said. "Said it was his rights." Miller closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Then he slid the wallet across the counter toward Braden. "Read it." Braden frowned, annoyed, and picked it up. His eyes scanned the badge. Twice. The color drained from his face. What is this?" Braden whispered. Miller leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "That," he said, "is a federal criminal investigator." Braden looked up slowly. Marcus met his gaze. There was no anger in Marcus's eyes, no triumph, only something far worse. Professional pity. And in that moment, Officer Kyle Braden understood something he should have learned long ago. He hadn't arrested a suspect. He had arrested the wrong man. The room didn't explode. It collapsed inward. Braden stood frozen, the wallet still open in his hands like something radioactive. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. A Fed," he finally whispered. Miller's eyes never left him. "Not just a Fed," he said. "IRS Criminal Investigation." Braden swallowed hard. He looked back at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. Not as a suspect. Not as a problem. But as a professional, Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. "Get those cuffs off him." Miller snapped, already moving around the counter. Yes. "Sarge." Braden stammered, fumbling with his keys. His hands were shaking now. The confidence was gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. The cuffs came off. Marcus rolled his wrists slowly. Red indentations visible where the steel had bitten into his skin. "Thank you, Sergeant," Marcus said calmly. Miller nodded, embarrassed. "I'd like my phone." Marcus continued. and I need to speak with your watch commander immediately." "Yes." "S." Miller replied without hesitation. "Lieutenant Freeman is in his office. I'll get him." Marcus raised a hand slightly. "One more thing," he said. Miller stopped. "No one touches Officer Braden's body camera. No one touches the dash cam footage. If anything is altered, deleted, or missing, I will escalate this beyond your department. Is that clear?" Miller's face went pale. "Crystal clear," he said. "Absolutely." He turned sharply toward Braden. "Break room. Now, do not touch your equipment. Do not make any calls." Braden nodded numbly and walked away like a man heading to his own execution. Through the small glass window of the break room door, Marcus could see him sit down heavily, burying his face in his hands. 3 minutes later, Lieutenant Freeman entered the booking area. He was a large man with a commanding presence, or at least he usually was. Tonight, his steps were measured. Careful, Agent Thorne. Freeman said, extending his hand, "I'm Lieutenant Freeman. I want to personally apologize for this misunderstanding." Marcus didn't shake the hand. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," he said evenly. "This was an unlawful deprivation of rights under color of law." Freeman's jaw tightened. "Sir, Officer Braden is young," he began. "He made a judgment call. He made a biased call." Marcus interrupted. "He detained me without reasonable suspicion. He arrested me for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. He used excessive force. He failed to secure me in the vehicle. And he verbally harassed me." Marcus retrieved his phone. "I am calling my special agent in charge," he said. "Then I'm calling the U.S. attorney for this district." Freeman's face drained of color. "Agent Thorne, please," he said quietly. "We can resolve this internally. Charges will be dropped immediately. Records expunged. There's no need to make this federal." Marcus looked up from his phone. "It already is federal," he said, "because your officer kidnapped me." The word landed like a gunshot. Freeman had no response. And in that silence, the balance of power finally snapped, not with violence, not with shouting, but with something far more dangerous. Accountability. Marcus stood in the middle of the booking area, phone pressed to his ear. His voice calm, almost routine. "Sack Johnson." "It's Thorne," he said. "Yes. I'm fine." "No. I'm at the 4th Precinct." Several officers nearby pretended not to listen. None of them succeeded. "I've been unlawfully detained and arrested," Marcus continued. "Yes. False arrest. Excessive force. I'll need a team sent over." Lieutenant Freeman closed his eyes briefly. "No. This isn't about me," Marcus added. "I want civil rights looped in. We need to look at stop and ID patterns, receipt checks, mall calls, all of it." Freeman's shoulders sagged. That wasn't a complaint. That was the beginning of an audit. Marcus ended the call and slipped his phone back into his jacket. "I'm leaving now," he said. "I want copies of the incident report, booking sheet, body cam footage, and property inventory. Tonight." "Yes, sir," Freeman replied quickly. "We'll have everything ready." Sergeant Miller was already at the printer. Behind the scenes, panic spread quietly. Internal Affairs was notified. The city attorney was woken up. The chief was briefed badly. Officer Braden sat alone in the break room, staring at the floor. Every few seconds, he looked up at the door as if expecting someone to come tell him this was all a mistake. No one did. By the time Marcus walked out of the precinct, paperwork in hand, the story was already escaping containment. A video shot by a woman in the parking lot hit social media before midnight. It showed a calm, well-dressed black man being shoved against glass by a screaming officer over a receipt. By morning, it had millions of views. Hashtags trended. Commentators dissected. The department issued a statement full of words like review and context. But context didn't matter anymore. Discovery did. Marcus's lawsuit didn't just name Braden. It named the city, the department, the store. Training failures, unlawful detention practices, a documented pattern of racial bias. Subpoenas pulled Braden's personnel file. 12 prior complaints. Excessive force, unprofessional conduct, racial profiling, all dismissed. Until now, in deposition, Braden sat in an ill-fitting suit, stripped of his uniform, his confidence gone. Officer Braden. Marcus asked calmly, acting as co-counsel, "Can you articulate the specific crime I was committing when you detained me?" Braden swallowed. I thought you stole the computer." Based on what facts Marcus asked? Silence. "You refused to show a receipt." Braden muttered. Marcus nodded. "Refusing a voluntary policy is not a crime," he said softly. "It's citizenship." The city didn't want a jury to hear that. They settled. $450,000. And the real consequences were just beginning. The settlement made headlines. 450 yuan. 000 to avoid a jury trial. But the money was the smallest part of the damage. The real cost showed up in places that didn't fit neatly into a press release. Officer Kyle Braden was terminated within weeks. Not transferred. Not reassigned. Fired. The state certification board followed soon after, citing conduct unbecoming and violations of constitutional rights. His badge was revoked. Permanently. Which meant one thing Braden hadn't considered that afternoon in the mall. He would never wear a police uniform in that state again. The department issued another statement. Then another. Mandatory constitutional law retraining was announced. Stop and identify policies were rewritten. Receipt check calls were removed from priority response lists. And buried deep in the consent decree language was a quiet detail few noticed. The new training curriculum had been reviewed by an external federal consultant, Marcus Thorne. Braden didn't see the courtroom when the settlement papers were signed. He didn't need to. By then, he was already gone. The last Marcus heard, Braden was working in a distribution warehouse on the edge of the city scanning boxes, checking packing slips, answering to a supervisor half his age. A job built entirely on one thing, verifying what belonged and what didn't. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Marcus never celebrated Braden's fall. He didn't toast to it, didn't post about it, didn't speak his name again. Because to Marcus, Braden wasn't the disease. He was the symptom. A system that confused obedience with legality. A culture that treated non-compliance as guilt. A badge that protected ego before it protected rights. When the settlement check arrived, Marcus didn't deposit it. He endorsed it. Every dollar went to a legal defense fund and a scholarship program for law students from communities that knew this story all too well, just without the federal badge at the end. He didn't need the money. What he needed was change. And change, he knew, was slow, but it had started. Because one receipt check had finally cost the system more than it was willing to pay. From the outside, this story looks like a win. The bad cop got fired. The city paid up. Policies were rewritten. Training was updated. It feels satisfying, clean, complete. But that feeling doesn't last long, not if you sit with the story just a little longer. Because Marcus Thorne didn't win this fight because the system worked. He won because he was exceptional. He won because he was calm under pressure. Because he knew the law better than the officer arresting him. Because he had the resources, the credibility, and the authority to push back. He won because, in the end, he wasn't powerless. But what if he had been? What if Marcus had been 19 years old instead of 54? What if he had been a college student with no legal knowledge? What if he had been a warehouse worker with a prior arrest on his record? What if fear had made him raise his voice, or pull away, or run? The entire outcome would have changed. Same officer, same behavior, same escalation, different ending. That's the part we don't like to talk about. Because justice, in this story, wasn't automatic. It was negotiated, purchased with knowledge, secured with credentials, enforced only after the system realized it had arrested someone who could fight back. And that means for every Marcus Thorne who wins, there are countless others who don't, not because they did something wrong, but because they didn't know how to protect themselves. Or worse, because they couldn't. Marcus said it himself later. Quietly, without cameras or speeches. This wasn't about me. It was about the next person. The one who doesn't know the words reasonable suspicion. The one who doesn't have a badge in his wallet. The one who just wants to go home. That's the uncomfortable truth hiding behind the victory. And it's the reason this story matters. 6 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Marcus Thorne walked back into Tech Haven. No cameras, no crowd, no headlines. The store looked exactly the same. Same polished floors. Same rows of glowing screens. Same artificial music floating through the air. The only difference was the man standing near the exit. A new loss prevention guard. Younger, quieter, hands folded behind his back. "Good afternoon." "Azur," the guard said politely. Stepping aside, Marcus nodded. "Good afternoon." He purchased a hard drive. Nothing special. No rush. When he walked toward the exit, no one stopped him. No raised voice. No command. No receipt demanded. "Have a good day," the guard said. "You too," Marcus replied. He stepped out into the sunlight. The air felt warm. Normal. Free. As Marcus walked to his car, the memory of the handcuffs flickered briefly in his mind, not sharp anymore. But not gone either. Some lessons don't fade. They settle. He sat behind the wheel, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Same face. Same calm eyes. Same posture. But the world around him hadn't changed nearly as much as people like to think. Somewhere else, another man was being stopped. Another voice was saying, "Sir, you're not free to go." Another badge was confusing obedience with law. Marcus started the engine. He had work to do. Because the truth is this: freedom isn't something you're granted once and keep forever. It's something you assert. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes at great cost. And sometimes you only realize how fragile it is when someone tries to take it over something as small as a piece of paper called a receipt. So ask yourself, if you were standing there that day alone, surrounded, recorded, what would you have done? Would you have shown the receipt just to get home, or would you have stood your ground? And should standing your ground ever put you in handcuffs? If you believe power should answer to the law, not the other way around, stay with us. There are more stories coming. And not all of them end with a badge in the wallet.